Hello and welcome. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the second event in the Women in Infrastructure DC Chapter Career Transition Series. Today, we will be in conversation with 4 former public sector professionals who have transitioned to the private sector: Kimberly Heimert, Julia Robbins, Sarah Thurston, and Lauren Bacardi. I'll first briefly introduce each of our panelists. We will then engage in conversation, and finally, we will have a few minutes to take audience questions. This event is open to all, and we thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. First, we have Kimberly Heimert. Kimberly is a non-executive director and senior executive with 30+ years of experience across private equity, debt finance, and infrastructure investment. Kimberly is the Chief Legal and Risk Officer at Novanix, the first and only North American producer of synthetic graphite. She is also a non-executive director of Alt Energy Acquisition Corp. And the Tennessee Arts Academy Foundation, and on the advisory board of Onyx Capital. She was the founder and CEO of Energy Transition Advisory Group, LLC, a boutique advisory firm that bridges the worlds of government and private capital, debt and equity, and developers and investors, while advising clients on clean energy, critical minerals, infrastructure, and public-private investment frameworks. Previously, Kimberly served as general counsel and a senior leadership team member at Africa 50, and was appointed by President Barack Obama as Vice President and General Counsel of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, the U.S. government's development finance institution, which is now DFC. Next, we have Julia Robbins. Julia is a principal on the structured finance team at Generate Capital, covering tax equity and project finance transactions. Previously, Julia was a vice president on U.S. Bank's environmental finance tax equity team, covering tax equity underwriting for community and utility scale solar projects and standalone battery projects, as well as 45X transactions. Prior to U.S. Bank, Julia worked for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, previously the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, as a director on its project finance team, covering project finance debt underwriting for a variety of asset classes, including power, transportation, healthcare, and telecom. Julia is a double former Fed, having served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. Next, we have Sarah Thurston. Sarah is my colleague at Bechtel, and she leads strategic work streams for Bechtel Enterprises' Private Capital Partnerships Initiative. She has nearly 20 years of international experience with expertise in project management, business development, strategic partnerships, and government relations. Before joining Bechtel in December 2023, Sarah was Deputy Project Director for a large USAID-funded development assistance program, building healthcare infrastructure in 12 emerging markets in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, we have Lauren Bacardi. Lauren leads the legal team supporting the Nature Conservancy's impact investment portfolio. Before joining the Conservancy, Lauren served at USAID, where she most recently was the Deputy Assistant General Counsel for USAID's Bureau for Food Security and for the Bureau of Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. Her work at USAID covered private sector engagement, impact investing, legislation and policy, and Middle East issues. Prior to USAID, Lauren worked on a wide variety of transactions as a corporate lawyer at Debevoise, focusing in particular on energy and environmental work. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to get started with the first round of questions. So first, each of you left government service more than a year ago, and the decision-making process for current or recent feds may be influenced by different factors than the factors that influenced your decision to transition. If you could please tell us about your decision-making process, when and why you knew you wanted to leave federal service, and anything else you'd like to share. And Lauren, may I ask you to share your experience first?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. So I left government service a while ago. It was about 6 years ago. I had been at USAID for about 7 years, and it was my dream job when I joined. I joined from a big transactional firm, and I had actually done a master's in international development with my law degree. So this was kind of a dream job, a way to apply the legal skills I'd acquired in private practice in the development context. Loved it. But I did hit a point where the work that I found to be most engaging, the impact investing work, was moving out of the agency for various reasons. But also there was a really flat structure in the Office of the General Counsel. And so it meant really limited opportunities for career growth. So I saw that to continue to grow, I would have to move into things that weren't really my sweet spot. I wasn't quite as passionate about. So I looked around, and then it was the question of whether to stay in the U.S. government and try and go someplace else where I could do the work I was excited about, or leave. And it's been really interesting for me. I've been talking to a lot of people who have been in transition from many agencies, USAID, but every place from CDC to DOJ to, beyond. And I think what a lot of people have in common is that they have a real sense of identity that's rooted in their U.S. government job. And so that was true for me, and it was important to find similar meaning and kind of similar identity in the work I was doing. And I ended up at a mission-driven organization, which I think really checked that box for me, at the Nature Conservancy. It was interesting. There were some upsides to leaving the U.S. government that I maybe anticipated a little bit, but it's been interesting to see how that's played out. There was a certain lightness. It almost even felt like a physical lightness at first in terms of not having, the full like federal bureaucracy plus Congress plus the whiplash of all these changing political winds. And, we always had changing political leadership through, no matter what administration was coming or going, there would be, there was just a lot of that kind of change. So that has been something that has been really interesting in terms of the change to the private sector. It's been refreshing to apply a skill set to a new set of challenges for sure. And I've grown in new substantive areas. So like the law of tax exempt organizations, I would not have ever, gone so deep in. So there are just lots of different areas of law and ways that I've grown, that, again, I sort of anticipated some of it. So some of that factored into my decision at the time, but some of it has been, sort of interesting to see in retrospect, how that's played out.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. And Kimberly, could I ask you to also share your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. So I transitioned out of government after about 8 years in government, um, when President Trump was inaugurated. And so because I entered government as a career at the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office, and then became a political appointee at OPIC as general counsel, and did not have the sort of reversion back to career option when I took the political appointment. Um, so my transition was a little bit unusual, and I guess it seems quaint now to sort of say it, but I guess if you are in that position of being a political appointee at any level of the government, don't assume you know how the election is going to turn out. It doesn't always work out that way, because certainly many of us were in the position that we assumed that we would not necessarily be serving in the same position in the next administration. But if the party had remained the same, or if there had been a sort of more standard at the time transition period, people at sort of our level generally would remain in place for some period of time just to keep some continuity, so to speak. That did not happen, as we did not see a transition person until the 19th of January, so one day before. So my transition was just faster than I thought it would be. I frankly thought that I would probably remain in place until sort of March, April. And instead, it was a very firm January 20th. So I guess the advice that I have about transition is, don't assume you know or can choose when to transition out. And I think that has happened in the last year, even for people who are not political appointees, even for people who are career employees, where sort of a decision point has been forced upon them in a way that wasn't necessarily expected in the past. So to a certain degree, always have your LinkedIn up to date, always continue to do your networking, always have your resume ready. And frankly, I think that that's good advice, whether you're in the government or not. It's always good to be thinking about what the next step may be. We are a generation away from the time where somebody took one job and stayed in that job for their entire lives. And so I think you always have to be ready to think about the next step.
That's really important. It can happen at any time, right? Keeping that network warm, absolutely so important. Keeping your LinkedIn up to date. Those are great ideas, Kimberly. Sarah, could I ask you, how did you structure your private sector search initially? And how did your strategy change over time? And then also, did you work with a recruiter or a coach, either initially or later on?
Yeah. So I made the decision about 4 years ago to leave what was a 17-ish year stretch of working for international NGOs that were implementing partners for USAID, and enjoyed those jobs and the mission. Got to do lots of interesting things in lots of interesting places, but ultimately felt like I needed to just try something new. And so I structured my search first by just talking to people, which seems like a very, very simple thing to say. But I really reached out to not just my professional network, but even my personal network, to talk with people who had interesting jobs, in part because when you do the same thing, more or less, for 15 plus years, you often don't know what else is out there, like what could be, and what the private sector looks like. I literally didn't know what types of jobs might be available at all, or specifically to me. So I probably spent 9 months or a year really reaching out to like literally neighbors who had interesting jobs and just asking them for 20 minutes to tell me about what they did. It felt very like juvenile, like I was, 20 coming out of college and just trying to understand the work world. But I went through a process of that and actually felt like that was a really good foundation for what then ultimately became a job search, just to give, some direction to it. I then was able to get more targeted and kind of snowball referrals from people, and actually also tap my professional network, who it's tricky when you have been in a certain sector for a long time, because sometimes your professional network isn't wide enough to afford you contacts in another sector. But really kind of worked the professional network. I did not work with a recruiter. I've spoken to a couple, and frankly, they didn't know what to do with me. They were looking it felt like they were looking to check boxes for their clients, and didn't quite know how to take my experience and reframe it. So I took an important lesson from that the reframing was something that I needed to land, and not think someone else would necessarily do that for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the recruiter question is something that I hear often from folks who are thinking about looking or unsure of what the next step is. And I certainly remember earlier on in my career where at a law firm, recruiters contact you quite frequently, and it may be the case for other business professionals. And you don't often get someone working with you directly in that way on the recruiting side anymore. I think the market's kind of changed, and recruiters are really looking to fill specific roles. And that was my experience. I think maybe
Yeah.
you all have probably had something similar. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say 100%, Kate. One of the things I wanted to note is, touch base with recruiters, give them your information, et cetera. Do not think that a recruiter is going to advocate for you unless they actually think that you will fill a spot that they are actively recruiting for, and therefore they will make their commission. Recruiters are working for the companies that hire them and pay them. If you do get placed in a position with a recruiter, that person becomes sort of a friend for life because they've made a good amount of money on you, and you've been a success. And so then they may be interested, but they are not working for you. They are working for the companies that hire and pay them. And so it's really important not to put too many of your eggs in that basket, or to think that, because you don't have a connection to a recruiter, that's a problem. Or because you do have a connection to a recruiter, life is easy. It's just not the way that it works.
Absolutely. Julia, I wanted to ask you, when you started interviewing, what skepticism did you encounter about your skills coming from a federal role into a private sector role, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And sorry for the technology issues, but I encountered, honestly, a ton of questions when I was leaving the government. And some of them were a little bit, it kind of took me aback. Like, I got a lot of questions about whether I'd be able to handle the pace or the workload of a private sector job, or whether my skills truly applied outside of the federal government. And, the skepticism, when you're in the government and you see how many wonderful people are working really hard and are truly doing amazing work every day, it was easy for me to forget that some people sort of have a bias occasionally against federal workers, and I had to overcome that. Honestly, what I did is I just really pointed to like actual discrete outcomes and times that I had achieved certain goals on a timeline. And coming from OPIC, I was really able to point to like specific deals that I had worked on and closed with difficult clients. And that sort of helped to sort of overcome that bias by showing like actual concrete things that I had done and accomplished in the government.
Julia, that's really interesting. I have seen this a little bit from the flip side as well. Being at an organization for the last 6 years, I've been involved in tons of hiring processes, and I think sometimes there is an impression that maybe US government lawyers just don't do this kind of work, that we're hiring for. And but I think exactly what you did is the path to success, which is to make the experience really translatable. And it's amazing. It feels almost obvious to or intuitive to say it, so it feels a little silly to say it out loud. But like those common pitfalls, like using tons of acronyms and things that nobody's going to understand. So many people do that, and or using a lot of inside baseball terms where you're speaking, in your narrative of what you've done to just really a very specific niche, and an ordinary person can't pick up your resume and be able to understand what you did. I mean, I think that's a good barometer, right? An ordinary person, total lay person, should be able to just pick it up and read it and get what you did. And so I think that's a really good way to break down the impression that the experience isn't translatable, because you make it translatable, right? And you make it super easily understood, and not making, not using a ton of jargon and all of that. So that's where I've seen kind of more success in terms of bridging that gap.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Sarah, that brings to mind something that you said earlier, right? About talking to a neighbor, somebody totally outside your field. That's a great person to send your resume to and say, hey, do you know what I do? Can you tell? Does this make sense? Use
I
a
mean, I
trusted
think
friend,
it's a
right?
through line that we need to do the work to bridge um, our narrative and our story and our translatable skills, that we can't assume that anyone outside can necessarily make sense. We need to put that extra effort in. It took me, like Lauren said, it sounds obvious to say out loud. It took me months to figure that out.
That's such helpful perspective. And I think actually, hopefully gives a lot of us hope, right? I remember my first interview when I was looking to leave government service, and it was not my best. Um, and it certainly improved over time. And it's because, I was in a role for a long time and got really comfortable and happy in that role. And but it's a skill. Interviewing is a skill. So it's okay if your first one's not so great. And think about tapping a friend or a trusted person in your life to do that first interview with you, right? It can be really helpful. Um, Kimberly, what's one thing you wish you'd done differently from the start of your search?
I suppose if I can, I'll have two things, Kate. The first thing would be sort of playing off of what Sarah was saying, is figure out, understand what my value proposition is. What do I bring? Why should somebody hire me to be a part of their business? Sort of that elevator speech, and focused on the top three, no more than four things that you really want to sell about yourself, that you really want to market about yourself. Because at the end of the day, that is what you're doing, is you are marketing yourself. You are selling yourself. And you have to be able to do that unabashedly. And that is something that, this is organization is sort of a little bit focused, I guess, on women. Women are, according to scientific studies, really hesitant to sell themselves. They can sell other people, they can sell a product, they can sell, et cetera, but selling themselves is something that we often find challenging. And you just got to work on it. You've got to sort of fake it till you make it. You've got to really sell yourself and have other people, people who you trust, who you're close to, tell you some of these good things that you bring. I remember I showed my resume to someone who Kate and Julia both know, Kathy Andrade, and she was like, this doesn't say anything about how amazing you are. You've got to be kidding me. You need to tell them that you did this. And she basically just tore my resume apart and said, this is all factual. This isn't helpful. You've got to sell yourself. You've got to have a story. And it was a very interesting experience having somebody who did work with me at OPIC give me that information. And sort of slap me back into reality of things. And especially when you are leaving somewhere and you're maybe leaving not when you choose to leave, it hurts. A lot of us sort of put our identity in our profession and our work life. And so you start questioning yourself. And it's okay to do that. You're not unusual for doing that, but you need to have that person out there who is saying, you're the greatest, you're amazing. You need that cheerleader, whether it be, your spouse or a friend or whoever it is, a former colleague. The other thing, and everybody sort of touched on this, is don't hesitate to reach out to your network. Reach out. I have never had people say no. Everybody understands that it's sort of what goes around comes around. And if people reach out to you, accept their reach outs. It's really important to do that over and over and over again. And know what it is that you want from the people you're asking to meet with or you're getting in touch with. If it is, as Sarah said, just tell me about your job. I'm looking to understand what's going on. Fantastic. If it is, I really want to work at one of these companies, and I see on LinkedIn that you're connected to X, Y, and Z at these companies. Can you introduce me? If it is, I am looking for a job in private equity. Do you have suggestions as to how I go about doing that? Make sure you know what your ask is. And don't be afraid to sort of follow up. Meet in person whenever you can for a coffee, for lunch, for whatever. That meeting in person matters. Follow up that meeting with an email, even if it's somebody you know. Follow up a couple of months later with another email, just checking in, updating you as to how things are going with me, et cetera. Just again, to put your name at the top of their mind. That's the key, because people get information about what's going on. And if you're not at the top of their mind, they may not refer you, but not because they don't think that you are a quality person, candidate, et cetera, just because everybody's busy. So it's important, but don't be a pest. So it's sort of that balancing act. So, figure out, once every couple of months is a fine routine to have. Once a week is probably a little too much. So figure out a nice cadence. But for most people, you're not going to, most women especially, you're not going to over connect. So those are the two things. Know what it is that you provide, know what your value proposition is, and don't be afraid to go out there and market yourself.
That's so
Could I
important.
just amplify
ahead,
one
Susan.
thing Kimberly said, which has to do with having coffee chats or touch bases with people and knowing what you want from that conversation? It's so important for your own strategy and progressing your job search, but also people that you're speaking with appreciate it. They don't necessarily just want to have a rambling chat, right? They want to know, what do you want from me? So there's a polite way to tell them, hey, I'm looking for XYZ up front. And I found a lot of good reaction to that, because then people are like, oh, okay, I can focus. I know what she's looking for. And then everyone's happier.
Yeah, and people do. If you don't know what you want them to do, people may leave the meeting with you just feeling bad. Like, I really like this person. I wish I could do something. I don't know what to do. And then they walk away with a bad feeling, which you don't want them to do, because then you don't want them to associate you with a bad feeling. If you give them an actionable something, they end up feeling better and like, oh, I did a good thing today. Yay, me. Which again is what you want them to feel.
Absolutely. And Julia, I know you've got some important perspectives on this question too.
I feel like people have said a lot of what I had to say, but I've been trying to be, as Kimberly said, when people reach out to you, it's important to, I think it's important for me to take time to talk to people because I'll be on the other side of that at some point. So I have been trying to be fairly generous with my time lately and talking to people, but I have noticed just a few things that I would just encourage you to avoid. Absolutely, like make sure you've researched the company and what I do and sort of a focus for why you want to talk to me. I sometimes get sort of very vague and general requests for people who want to work in international finance or people who want to work in renewable energy. And these are enormous fields where there's tons of different ways to work in them. And so sort of have a little bit more and it's okay if your point is to learn about the field, but like have that be the purpose and point of the call. And then I have had some people reach out to me and you get 30 minutes. I'll give people 30 minutes to talk to me, and they might spend 20 of it kind of griping and complaining about the current status of working for the government. So just, you have a small amount of time, sort of be strategic with what you're, with the time that you have with the person that you're talking to. And yeah, have specific follow-ups. Like I think that it's sort of easy to forget, but have specific asks of companies or introductions that you'd like or information that you want to get out of it. And, I think this theme has already been repeated, but a lot of government acronyms and government programs don't mean a lot to people outside of the government. So make sure that you find a way to sort of translate what you do and what you're saying to what's to the conversation. If you tell me that you're leading an interagency coordination or something, I mean, I might know what that means, but I don't really. But if you tell me that you were the project manager for a large group to deliver something on a specific timeline, that is something I can sort of relate to.
It's such a helpful, just very quick reframing, Julia, right? It's project management, or it's a large product or a large deliverable or a time-sensitive matter. These are broadly applicable concepts, but interagency, right, is not. That's a very government-specific type of concept. Even though for all of us who've worked in the government, we know that's a major role. You don't get that role unless you've got the trust of a lot of people internally, and demonstrated track record of success. So that can be a really helpful reframing. Lauren.
And I'm sorry, Kate, just one thing, that coming out of government is a really important thing, because by the time I came out of government, I had spent 50% of my career in the private sector and about 50% of my career in the government. A little bit more in the private sector, actually. It was about 10 years in the private sector, about 8 years in government. And I was looked at as a government lawyer, and I'm like, what the blank? I spent 10 years working in law firms and at GE Capital before I served my country for 8 years. How am I just a government lawyer? So be prepared for that, regardless of what you have done in the private sector before your government service.
Yeah,
And I might
absolutely.
just add one thing, like even like translate when you get to the next step of your resume, like that is another spot where like people have sent me their resumes and they're very government focused, and just try to, and this is another way that like if you have a friend or a neighbor or somebody who can help you kind of translate and help translate what a government experience is to something that makes sense to someone in the private sector, and really like focusing on like concrete projects or concrete outcomes or something like that that's very if you think about like explaining to your friends at a dinner party what you do, friends who don't work for the government, Like that's kind of the level that you need to bring things to so that other people understand. And even sometimes when you're at a dinner party with your government friends, I don't know every USAID acronym. I don't know every department in the State Department. Make it accessible. You have great experience.
I think that's such a nice note to end this question on, right? You have great experience because you do. We know you do. We were there and we saw it. And there's really high quality work happening. So don't get discouraged. Have that goldfish brain. Means forget the things that hurt your feelings and keep moving. Um, it really does help. Um, Lauren, I'd like to talk to you about some of the skills that you developed in government service, which have been most valuable in your post-government career. And then what skills are you seeing are really valued as you're evaluating candidates now, having been at the Conservancy for several years?
Sure. So it's a really interesting question. I think everybody would have a different answer to this one, right? Based on their experience. For me, three things really jump out. The first one is that I understand government in a way that many people don't, right? I've been in the trenches there, and a big part of my job is negotiating with the US government or foreign governments. So knowing, a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of the USG is certainly helpful, but also just understanding how to work with a government and understanding when I'm dealing with multiple ministries and understanding the stakeholders that I can map it in a way that I think people who haven't been in that role have a harder time doing. So that's been a really nice translation of specific skills over. I would say also the more general skill of just being able to work through issues in a really complex multi-stakeholder environment. I mentioned before kind of the lightness of not having so many stakeholders, but my organization has lots of stakeholders. Anywhere you go will, right? And so I think that being able to translate that concept, and that's, a nice, again, like a nice resume point and interview point to be able to say when and how you've done that. And very, very translatable to a huge, complex organization. We operate in 79 countries worldwide and all over all 50 states in the US. There's lots of people who have lots of thoughts on anything I'm working on. So that's been very translatable. And then finally, and I think in maybe others on the call might in their respective fields have seen this as well. I think there is a real skill set in terms of being able to translate highly technical concepts between legal and non-legal audiences, and it can go both ways, right? So I might have to translate really highly technical legal concepts to the scientists that I work with. And that was true at USAID, and it's true at the Nature Conservancy where I am now, or, agronomists or whomever, have amazing PhDs and have done fantastic work. And I can, I understand what they do at like a first grade level, so I have to be able to take that and be able to actually on the flip side, put that into a legal agreement. And so it's that translation back and forth. And as I think back to when I looked at different opportunities at different organizations, that actually was not unique to the Nature Conservancy. That was something I saw as a theme in many places. So I think being able to have that consistent experience over time was a selling point. And that's something that we look for in people that we hire, because that's going to be true no matter kind of what aspect of illegal work it is that you're doing at the Nature Conservancy. So I think a lot of these are sort of more broadly translatable concepts, but I think it's taking that, how can you take the kind of complex structure that you were in and map it to a new complex structure and be able to kind of figure out what those commonalities are, I think is a real potential selling point.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And I wanted to also ask Kimberly, you're in some quite senior roles, advisory roles. And I'm wondering if you can think about that strategic advisory skill set that you developed and whether or not you think any of that was done at the government.
Oh, without question. My experience in the government, which hopefully is somewhat unusual because I ended up, when I was at the Department of Energy, getting involved in or defending ourselves in the Loan Programs Office against all of the many investigations that emanated after the Solyndra project collapsed. And so ended up way before I should have interacting a lot with the many different parts of the Department of Energy, from legislative affairs, the Secretary's office, to comms, to just name an office. And I ended up interacting with them and really playing a role that was far outside of a legal role. That really was, okay, let's think about this strategically. And then when I went to OPIC, the role of general counsel at then OPIC was also one that was a very much a strategic advisory role for the president and CEO, certainly on legal issues, but also just thinking about how we were going to achieve our mission, what our strategic objectives actually were, and especially with my background, where I had been spending my entire career bringing together private sector, public sector in order to build projects and improve the emerging market world for people, which is not always what I had done, but was significantly what I had done. It was definitely something that I could bring to the table. It wasn't something that was necessarily part of the job description, but I was able to show that I was able to do that. And thankfully, I was working with people who were very happy to have me play that role. And so I think that's, to a certain degree, one thing that I would advocate for people to do is, spread your wings a little bit, especially if you've got people you're working with who are happy to have you spread your wings. Don't see your job as a very narrow interpretation of your job. It allows you to gain more skills, to create skill sets that you never thought that you would have. And there's no skill that I've ever accumulated professionally that I haven't been able to use somewhere else, even if it seems rather silly. I mean, for example, when I got to the Department of Energy, I had no idea what credit subsidy cost was. I didn't think that I wanted to have any idea what credit subsidy cost was, et cetera, et cetera. I understand it far more than I am ever wanting to admit. It's very useful these days in the private sector, because when deals are being announced that have these different components, I can explain to my colleagues why. I can explain things to my colleagues and to potential investors that other people simply can't explain. I'll just leave it at that, which is really valuable. And being able to, I don't remember who said it, but to sort of put on different hats. I think, Lauren, you said it, that you understand government in a way that people who haven't been in government cannot understand it. So being able to do that and really parlaying that into making people understand that your ability to speak different languages, like you said also, Lauren, you can translate legal into technical and technical into legal. You can do private into public and public into private and debt into equity and equity into debt and whatever. You can speak lots of different languages and therefore bring people together, bridge those gaps of communication, I think is really important.
It's really that translatable skill, right? That connecting of different sets of expertise, being the bridge. Absolutely something I think we probably all learned in government. Julia, I wanted to ask you, when you landed that first post-government role, what happened next? Like, how did it feel? Did you feel like you made the right decision? How did that go?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm realizing I should tell you all how I got that job, because that might be useful information as well. Because I decided that I was going to leave OPIC. And so I just started calling people. I decided I wanted to work in renewable energy, and I started calling everybody I knew who worked in renewable energy. And one of those people was a former colleague from OPIC who'd left a few years before, who was at a bank. And I called her to, just sort of have a friendly chat about what different roles were out there at banks. And she was like, you know what, you shouldn't come to the bank that I work at. You should go to this other bank. And they had an open role. And, after I'd already gotten the job, what I learned is that she had actually called them and told them that, like, basically given them proactively a really strong referral for me and told them that they should hire me if they had a role for me. So, like, that networking piece and keeping in touch with your network, it truly works. And that is how I ended up at US Bank. And US Bank was for me the perfect transition out of government. I had been in the government for about 10 years. And US Bank is another just gigantic organization. It's 70,000 plus employees. It's a huge infrastructure. And just the day to day of my job, even though I was switching from doing international project finance work in a commercial role at OPIC to doing tax equity work at a role at a bank, the day to day, like 60% of my job seemed to be the same to me. And so this sort of idea that there was something mystical or magical that people were doing in the private sector at banks, it's not true. People in the government are doing excellent work that is on par, or if not even above what the work of some people in the private sector are doing. Like the deals that I was working on at US Bank honestly were easier, significantly easier than the deals that I worked on at OPIC. The only real difference was that the pace was different. At OPIC, we were given these really difficult deals and the clients didn't love it, but we had enough time to work through it. Whereas at the bank, I had about 3 months to do each deal. So there was that difference in pace. I would say that the thing that kept surprising me when I came to the private sector and was at US Bank was that sometimes when I was at OPIC, it felt like a lot of my job was sort of getting all the people on the boat and convincing them all to row together to get the project done. Whereas when I showed up at the bank, it was like everyone just hopped in the boat and started rowing. And I was like, oh, this is different. Like there was a lot, and this might be very specific to my experience in government and banking, but it felt like all of a sudden I was in an organization that was built for speed and efficiency in some ways. Whereas sometimes in the government, there was sort of, you could get bogged down a little bit, and it felt a little bit like you were the one sort of dragging the boat along, trying to make the deal happen. And that was just a fantastic transition for me. It was also helpful that there were a couple people in the organization who also had government experience. And it was the kind of role where it really did benefit to kind of understand the mindset of how government rules and regulations are made. Now I'm in my second post-government job at Generate, and I'm so happy that I had the transition at US Bank because Generate is about 200 people, so it's much smaller. It's much more the feel of like not exactly a startup, but that sort of energy and feel of a lot less infrastructure, a lot more just figuring it out as we go, kind of a lot of individual, not as much infrastructure around us to support us here. So I think I just really lucked out with that transition. But to say, like, it was a friend from the government who helped me get that job. And so keep your network fresh and up to date on what you're looking for, and people will help you.
Absolutely. And I have to say, Julia, I went to US Bank because of you. I mean, we help each other, right? And it was great for me too. I mean, um, and you don't have to stay at that post-government job forever. I mean, I think all of us had kind of a long tenure in federal service, and probably really liked being there for a number of reasons. Um, your next role doesn't have to be the same tenure. You don't have to look for the next thing forever. It's okay to look for the next thing that's right now. I personally can say I made a couple mistakes along my whole career journey, right? I know if something's not right pretty quickly. You can look at my LinkedIn and figure that out. But
But OPIC was the best, right?
certainly during your tenure as general counsel, Kimberly.
Thanks.
Yes. But Sarah, I wondered if you had some perspectives too on the question that I asked for Julia, and then just also maybe what you miss a little bit about government service or what you like the most about the private sector.
So I was reflecting on the what I miss about government service, and for me, my version of government service was working for a nonprofit that was a implementing partner for the government. The kind of obvious thing is working for a mission focused or mission driven organization, and missing that and missing the people I work with and their dedication to the sort of causes that motivated everyone to end up there. However, I found that I'm able to kind of reframe mission for what I'm doing in the private sector. And I think that that's possible for a lot of private sector jobs. And those of us that were drawn to federal service or to nonprofits because of the mission can find something fulfilling in the private sector. And the example I'll use, Kate and I work for Bechtel, and Bechtel builds things, infrastructure, energy, things that are like totally critical to society, functioning economies, running. And without those things, you know, there we wouldn't have the standards of living that we do. And so I've been able to think about working for this private sector entity that does these things as mission. And we may not talk about it, Kate, at the office in terms of fulfilling a mission. It's, you know, it's not the same language. We don't use the same words. But I think you are able to find private sector roles with impact. Often it's just sort of couched differently. And so for me, that's helped me with the missing of being at a mission focused or mission driven organization. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
And Lauren, you are at an organization that I assume has a mission focus. Would you agree? And has that been a through line for you?
I am absolutely at an organization with a very strong mission-driven kind of ethos to it. It has been a through line for me, and that was really helpful when I transitioned. It was a really helpful kind of next step for me because I do think, like I was saying before, you know, you kind of have your sense of identity and partly wrapped up in this work that you're doing to what, you know, public service in some way, and it was a good transition for me. You know, I think, like you said, Sarah, there are a lot of ways to define that. And so, you know, it's finding kind of your purpose. And it's also an interesting time, I would say. I'm sorry, I'm going to go backwards a little bit to the like last round of questions and what we're talking about and tie it to this one too. And that I think, you know, as you're transitioning, and that I know so many people right now, former colleagues, friends, et cetera, who are transitioning and didn't think they would be or don't want to be. And that's really hard. It's different than voluntarily deciding, hey, it's time, I've outgrown this, or I want to go do that. So I think what's important is to distill down that, you know, some of the things like, you know, can think of a friend who I've been talking to who, you know, feels really passionate about certain issues, but now actually is just really tired and doesn't want to be in the center of all the issues, and so is mission driven and wants to be a place where they feel like their work matters. But again, that can mean many things. It doesn't have to mean that you're in the middle of the issue that's the most politically contentious today. Right? And so what is it that you want? And do you want, you know, and it's finding the constellation of things and knowing not everything will be ideal. And sadly, it might be a pay cut, but maybe a better title and a way to stretch for skills. So you're going to do that strategically for a couple years. You know, like I think it's important to think about transitions now in particular and bridges. What is a good bridge role? To the point you guys were making about, you know, your first steps outside of government and moving over to the bank. And I think it's, you know, it's kind of a different mind frame than just starting out as, hey, I want to move and this is going to be the unicorn perfect job. That's going to be the thing that'll, you know, that'll take me. But rather, you know, it's seeing it as steps in a long career.
That's such a great and helpful perspective to think about sort of bridges. And I guess we can use another kind of road-based acronym, but highways, right? You know, what are you building? What do you want to build eventually? What's important to you? It might not be salary, or maybe it is. Maybe you're leaving federal service and it's like, guys, I just want to make money. And that's perfectly okay too. Yeah, thinking about not necessarily knowing exactly where you want to be at some particular point in time, but where you think your skill sets can lend themselves to with the right experience and the right support and training and opportunities. That could be a helpful way to think about it. We have one more question for our presenters today. And Kimberly, I'm going to end with you, and then we're going to take one question from our audience. So Kimberly, looking back, what, if anything, would you do differently in your new role in general? And then what would you focus on doing during the first 90 to 180 days, let's say?
Yeah, in the new role, and I think that this sort of plays into what we've been talking about, which your network is very important. An error that I have made in my career up until the last couple of years has been, I'm going to be the best person at the job that I am in. I'm going to give it 100%. Everybody within the building is going to think that I am the greatest. I am the bee's knees. Nobody could possibly do this without me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, within the building, within the organization. And that's great. You build alliances, you build supporters, et cetera, within the organization. However, again, you are unlikely to stay at that organization for your entire career. And therefore, one of the things that I have started doing, which I never have before, is thinking about making sure that I am continuing to expand and work a network outside of the organization. So kind of continuing to market yourself in your current role, but outside of your current role. So, So have lunches, coffees, whatever, certainly with people inside your, I knew it was coming, both inside your organization, but also outside of your organization. And when you do that, be a positive person. Talk about things that are going on in your industry, things that are exciting to you. You do not want to be the person who is funny and amusing, but kvetches about your job or whatever. You want to be talking about, these are the things that I'm thinking about. These are the things that I think we should do in the industry. This is the stuff that I find really interesting, again, outside of the organization. Participate in industry events, speak at conferences, get out there in the milieu so that people, when they think about the sector, you are one of the people that they think about. That is, I think, an incredibly important thing to do. Keep your LinkedIn up. LinkedIn is a powerful, powerful tool professionally. Keep it up. Write something and post it at least once a month. It doesn't have to be a long something. It can be a couple of paragraphs, at least once a month, once a week, if it's possible to do so. Repost things. It is an important thing to have because, again, anybody who looks at LinkedIn, and a lot of people are looking at LinkedIn, the more you post, the more frequently the algorithm will pop your post up on other people, and it just keeps you at top of mind. Another little interesting advice that, again, that I have given to myself is you do a lot of interviews when you're looking for a job. You don't get most of them. Some you get and you say no to if you're lucky. Keep in touch with those people that you've interviewed with. If you've gotten to the point of having an actual interview, they're impressed with something. It might be that you weren't the perfect fit, but keep in touch with them. There's no reason not to update them. Don't think that it's a terrible thing that you didn't get that particular job. What you focus on during the first 90 to 180 days, number one, listen. Go in, listen. Ask people to tell you about the organization, about your predecessor, about your department, et cetera, et cetera. Spend a lot of time listening before you go in to try to make any changes. That is incredibly, incredibly important. Then another piece of advice that I have, and I swear I should get a cut because I give this to anybody who's changing jobs that I know, is this book. Whoops, hold on. Can you focus? Will it focus? It's not focusing.
I'll put it in the chat, Kimberly.
Okay. It is The First 90 Days, Proven Strategies for Getting Up to Speed Faster and Smarter. It is easy to read. It is full of stuff that when you read it, you go, well, of course, of course, of course. But having it all in one spot, there are a couple of little pearls of wisdom, is extremely helpful. really look at it as a very methodical sort of business plan for your first 90 and then 180 days. It is helpful to every job that I've had, starting at OPIC. I have done one of these plans for myself so that, because when you get into a place, the fire hose starts spreading water on you and knocking you down, and then you end up putting out fires left and right. And then you aren't able to actually be thoughtful about your new position. Being thoughtful about your new position while putting out the fires is incredibly important and helpful, and creates a better environment for yourself and for everybody around you. So I really recommend this book. It is something you can sit down with for a couple of hours at most, highlight things, and then just keep it in mind as you're starting to make your transition. And if anybody wants to write to the author and say, Kimberly ought to get a cut, feel free.
Kimberly, I'm going to go get that book right now. I should have read it. I'm 5 months into a new job. I wish I'd read it. Everything you just said resonated. Everything you just said resonated perfectly with what I wish I had known 5 months ago.
I'm Michael D. Watkins. It's on Amazon and other places that are not, big corporate monoliths.
Absolutely. So we have 5 minutes left. Before we get into some audience Q&A, I do want to thank a couple of people who made this possible. So we have a fantastic team at Leo Barwick who are responsible for hosting this event. I'd like to thank Liz McBride in particular, who provided some really invaluable support to us, along with some of my WIN DC colleagues, Victoria Karolinko and Wakego Uzo. Thank you, Liz, Victoria, and Wakego. This event would not have been possible without your support. And I, of course, want to thank all of our panelists. I think I've learned a lot. And I know all of you and we talk. So it's fantastic, reach out to your network. Everybody's got great things to tell you. But we wanted to end on a positive note. We had one question from one of our participants who asked, we've been hearing a lot from, folks who are looking at a transition and have a lot of fear, frankly, which is totally understandable. And does anybody have any success stories, some pump ups, any breakthroughs you'd like to share, just like a rapid fire round we could do right at the end for everybody? And Lauren, I'll start with you.
That's a great question. I would say that it's really hard to do this every day, like get up and keep applying and looking, right? And a friend who was part of all the USAID dissolution and resulting repercussions through the job market, just landed a fantastic new position. I'm very, very happy to say. So positive story, but she had a great analogy. She said, every day you're just planting seeds, right? And things are going to come to fruition. Like keep planting those seeds, and you don't know which one's gonna hit and grow. But keep at it, because it's not fruitless. And I loved what Kimberly said about, you don't get a job, keep in touch. That's how I got my USAID job. Didn't get the first one I applied to. Felt very bold that day and just called up and said, hey, I was just wondering what could I have done to strengthen my application? She said, we loved you, but this other person had this, and that. So keep in touch. And I did. Next time a position came up, I called her, and it was like very smooth. So, so I just say, keep planting those seeds, and something, something's going to come. You just need one thing. You don't need a million things. And something's going to come out of it.
Sarah, how about you? What do you think?
I think being patient and being persistent are my two takeaways. You don't know how long it's going to take. And it's hard to maintain the momentum and stamina. So being persistent is really important.
Kimberly, what do you think? Any pump up stories or breakthroughs that you have to share?
Things come from places that you wouldn't imagine. I mean, I am in the current role that I am in. I had started my own business. It was working. I was being able to support my family, all of that kind of stuff, but I missed working with people. Somebody who I worked across the table on a deal with in 2005, who I had stayed in touch with, but we were across the table from each other on a restructuring, a Venezuelan deal. Thank you, Hugo Chavez. It was a disaster. But anyway, he called, actually, he texted me and said, would you ever consider moving to Chattanooga, Tennessee? And I said, I'm sorry, what? And he had been talking to the chairman of a board of my company. They had decided, or for various reasons, they were looking for a new chief legal officer. And he said, I've told them about you. They're really excited. Any interest? And I said, sure. And 2 weeks later, I had a job offer. So, and this is somebody who I didn't think of as being somebody who would find a job for me, a job that I really love and is challenging and is interesting and is allowing me to really spread my wings and do all sorts of things that I've never officially done. But he's somebody that I met in 2005 across the table from. So we were on opposing sides. So again, keep that network, and you don't know where things are going to come from.
Absolutely. You really never know. Julia, I never thought you would have asked me to come over to US Bank, but you did, and it was great. What do you think, Julia? Any pump up stories or success stories you have to share?
I know we're at time. I would say that like one of the things I was thinking when we were talking mission, like one of the things that frustrated me at OPIC was that I really wanted to work on renewable energy. And I actually found more mission alignment once I left the government. So you can continue to have a mission and a purpose to your work after you leave government, that you're not giving that up by leaving the government. And like the other thing, I had a friend who was my cheerleader through the whole process of leaving OPIC, who over and over again told me that my skills were applicable, that my experience was valuable. And so I want that for all of you all. Your skills are applicable, your experience is valuable. You will do great in the private sector.
Thank you. That's a perfect note to end on. We really appreciate your attention today. Good luck to everybody who is in this process. We hope it's been helpful to you, and thank you again.
Thank you.